to the Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Brad Pinkerton, and today we get what I think is the most fun topic of the preseason, talking about sleepers.
Yep, this is the most fun topic, and this is also where us fantasy experts have to lay down our cards and give away all our secrets, so it's not that much fun for me.
Well, for me, the best part about it is the I told you so factor. I mean, by the All-Star break, if you were the one who drafted Gordon Beckham early on or whatever it was that first year, if you drafted him, you kept him on your roster just to see what he would do, and you know what? He goes out there and hits like Joe DiMaggio for 3 months, and you had him, and you were right, you nailed it. Everyone will forget the 10 guys you got wrong.
Well, that's the nature of fantasy owners, right? And we always remember that one sleeper that hits it big. But just keep in mind, you're taking a risk every time you're drafting or reaching for one of these sleepers. So
you talked about taking a risk. Let's go into what your philosophy is about how do you identify a sleeper. Basically, for those of you who may not exactly know what we're talking about, it's basically someone that everyone else in the league is sleeping on, someone that you think is going to be better than anyone else in your league thinks he's going to be.
Right, and really all it comes down to is whether this guy will outperform his draft position. If you get him in the 12th round and he produces like an 11th rounder, maybe that's not a huge breakout, but you know what? You got a little bit of value there.
Yeah, that all adds up. So, all right, let's start out with probably the most valuable positions. Let's do it that way. Catcher, probably the shallowest position out there, and a place where a lot of people, they basically decide if they don't get one of those top three guys, they're going to take a flyer on a high upside guy.
Yeah, and if you're going to do that, I think Carlos Santana is that sleeper to look at. I see him kind of following Buster Posey's footsteps. But if you're really going to wait and swing for the fences, so to speak, JP Arancibia in Toronto, he's got some serious power.
I love that guy because he profiles like a cleanup hitter. He's less low profile than someone like Jesus Montero, but he definitely has that potential to do that. Shortstop. There are some really young players that I see on your list here, and we're talking about youngest player in baseball last year.
Yeah, and you're not going to find any sleeper shortstops that are going to come up and give you 20 homers, 20 steals, so you kind of have to look for a guy who's going to help you in one or two categories specifically. And I like Starlin Castro. Guy hit 300 last year as a 20-year-old. That's pretty impressive, so I see a lot of upside there, and his speed's going to get better. His base stealing ability will get better. And along those lines, Alcides Escobar now. You know, he's going to hopefully have the starting role there in Kansas City, and hitting at the top of the order, that's a young and upcoming lineup. Maybe he can give you a lot of runs and with a few steals. He's got very good speed.
He had a very down year last year, and like you said, the entire Kansas City lineup might actually be a little bit underrated because they're considered a terrible team. They're not likely to win much this year, but they have some pieces that are actually going to do some damage.
Well, they're definitely not overrated.
Yeah, that's very true. Let's move to second base. Who do you see as being guys that maybe the other people in your league haven't even heard of before?
Well, actually, get to know a Japanese import, Nishioka, for the Minnesota Twins. I got a feeling his nickname will be Yoshi, and he will go by that just as Ichiro is in Seattle. But he's actually a middle infielder from Japan. Won the batting title last year at 346. He's not going to hit that highly. I'm actually thinking maybe 280 is a little more respectable, but he's got decent speed, decent tools all around. He's a very good middle infielder, so he will most likely opens as a starting second baseman for the Twins. So he's someone to keep an eye on in the late rounds if you're looking for that middle infielder.
Okay, moving on to the outfield. Let's just keep you on your toes. Let's moving around the field. Who do you see as guys that, you know what? Again, the other guys in your league, they're going to go for name brand guys. Who are the off-label guys, as it were, that you would be looking at?
Yeah, well, I think some of the bigger name breakouts that are going to get a lot of publicity and maybe a little too much this preseason are Jay Bruce, Drew Stubbs there in Cincinnati. Those guys' draft stock is rising every day, so they might get out of reach by the time draft comes around. But going deeper, Ryan Rayburn and the Tigers, he had a tremendous second half. And if they can find him playing time for a full season, I'm interested to see what he can do. I'm not going to put all of my eggs in his basket, but I am excited to see what he could do.
He's the poster child for limited playing time, but doing exceptionally well at the plate in that time. Let's move back to the infield. Third base.
I like Pedro Alvarez for his power. Now, he's going to go through some cold spells, and that's ultimately going to lead to a fairly low average. So if you're willing to put up with that just for the power numbers, I think he's worth it. And then some reaching deeper, Wilson Betemit. If he gets a starting job in Kansas City, he's got a little pop too. He's probably more for the AL only crowd, but he's someone definitely to target. And on the other side, NL only, guys want to be looking at David Freese. You know, anytime you get a young guy who can hit for a 300 average around the Albert Pujols and Matt Holliday in your lineup, you've got some chance to put up some numbers.
He's also going to scare people off because he's recovering, I believe, from double ankle surgery along those lines. But his minor league track record is excellent. The guy can just flat out hit, and they just need to find a place for him. So fantasy managers will let you qualify as a third base. Let's go to the mound. Relief pitchers. Now, this is an interesting one because last year I was huge on Carlos Marmol. He far outperformed anything I could have imagined he would do, but it was because he had been an excellent strikeout positioner in a setup role, and then they just decided, you know what, let's move him into the closer role. Suddenly he has massive fantasy value as a closer.
That's what you want to look at is those strikeout numbers. And a guy who had great numbers last year, Joel Hanrahan, he's going to get the starting nod as a closer. So we'll see how that goes. But keep in mind Evan Meek behind him. He was the Pirates All-Star last year, so he's got a pretty good arm and could step in if Hanrahan falters. But also Chris Sale is someone to watch in Chicago. Matt Thornton is most likely going to open as the closer, but he's not a youngster. He had great numbers last year. I'm not completely sold that he can repeat, and they might find him more valuable elsewhere. But Chris Sale is someone to watch. He's a flamethrower from the left side.
And Sale is also very, very odd from a fantasy perspective because they may think he's so valuable that they want to have him as a starter if Jake Peavy just can't come back.
Right. That probably depends a lot on Peavy or some of those other low-end rotation guys. But
starting pitchers. I mean, I see some guys on your list that we've mentioned before in our breakout episode of the podcast. But I also see a couple other guys that I think you're more high on than anybody else I've talked to.
Well, I like Phil Hughes, and I know a lot of people are going to point to that second half collapse, and I think that just has to do with he had never worked that much before. So he hit the wall last year, and I expect him to be more conditioned and ready to get through a full season. But also Brian Mattis, he finished the season very strongly. And I'd like to see him continue that through this year.
The thing about those two guys that I would try to remind managers of is that they have an incredible pedigree. They were drafted highly. They were highly touted all the way through the minor leagues and all the way up to the majors. Just because they have maybe 1 year of a little bit of a struggle, you still got to give them that chance because they've performed so exceptionally well as professionals.
And don't overlook teammates there in Cincinnati, Edison Volquez and Johnny Cueto. This could be the year that both of them put it together.
I love that. I love that you mentioned those guys because one of my favorite principles in fantasy is they may be boring, but they're still good.
Good strikeout guys.
I mean, those are the guys. They've been there for the past couple of years. They've been doing it. And by now, they're probably a little bit boring to a lot of fantasy managers.
If nothing else, I'll give you Cade.
All right. Brad, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot.